Back here on CBS Sports HQ, presented by Canva, it is time for Jamie Eisenberg's start of the week. And for that, we're going to go to the 49ers because it is Brock Purdy who is Jamie's start of the week. We're thinking he's going to get CMC. He's going to get Juwan Jennings back for this matchup against Tampa Bay. And we know this Tampa Bay team, this defense is really banged up. So let's bring in the gentlemen, Jamie Eisenberg and Dave Richard, who are joining us here on HQ. Jamie, why is Brock Purdy primed for a big week, in your opinion, in Week 10?
You know, Jacqueline, it's a great matchup. The Bucs are number 2 in most fantasy points allowed to opposing quarterbacks, and they actually made Patrick Mahomes look good. You know, that's a rare thing these days that Mahomes actually looks like a good fantasy quarterback. But he had over 30 fantasy points last week, and we've seen 4 quarterbacks, including Mahomes, in the last 5 weeks go over 30 fantasy points. Kirk Cousins twice. Lamar Jackson did so as well. Now, Purdy hasn't exactly been consistent with his fantasy production. He actually doesn't have back-to-back games with 20-plus fantasy points, but it's going to happen this week with a bye in between. Last time we saw him 28 fantasy points prior to their bye week, and you mentioned it. Getting McCaffrey back will open up the offense. Juwan Jennings gives him another piece that he can throw to without Brandon Ayuk on the field, but George Kittle's going to be fine. Deebo Samuel should have a big opportunity. It's just really a great situation for Brock Purdy to walk into off the bye week in a great matchup, and I think, as you see here, he got potentially top 5 upside, but he's number 6 for me.
28 or more fantasy points in 2 of his last 3 games, and he's taking on a Tampa Bay defense that has reliably played zone coverage for really as long as Todd Bowles has been there. So he knows what the scheme is going to be when he walks in. You mentioned McCaffrey being back. That's big. I think Juwan Jennings coming back is pretty big too. And so I look at other quarterbacks. You mentioned Patrick Mahomes. I'm starting Purdy over Mahomes. I know Mahomes had the big game last week. It was against this defense. I think Brock Purdy, top 10 quarterback this week. I like the call.
Hopefully he has a big game. Here's some other starts for me for week number 10. It's a fun week. Remember, 4 teams are on a bye this week, so just keep an eye on who may or may not be out. And we got Tua Tagovailoa in another good matchup taking on the Rams. Tyrone Tracy's in Germany. I think he's going to beat up on the Carolina Panthers there. Josh Downs and Hunter Henry in some good matchups as well. We'll talk about Henry in a second. But let's talk about Tua because he's coming off one of his better games so far this season. Not that he's played many because he missed 4 with the concussion, but 21.5 fantasy points last week against Buffalo in a tough matchup. Now he's taking on a Rams defense that's allowed at least 22.2 fantasy points in each of their last 2 games. And this is one of the more highest projected games of the week. Vegas telling us this game expected to go north of 50 points. So I think Tua's got top 12 upside. I think I'm in the minority there saying that he should be in the top. I think I'm 10th. Should be in the top 10. But as you see here, our consensus ranking has him at 13.
The Rams have allowed at least 20 fantasy points to 5 of the past 7 quarterbacks they face, including at least 28 to 3 of each of the last 3 28 to 3 of those 5.
Say that 10 times fast.
I don't even want to say it again. I just know that they allow a lot of fantasy points. That's good for Tua. But I also know this Dolphins offense has really done a great job running the ball. And I think that that's something that they're going to try and lean on right out of the gate. Tua actually looked pretty good last week once he actually took more than a second and a half to hold on to the ball, read the defense, fire downfield. 2 great throws to Tyreek Hill. I wish he'd have like 6 great throws downfield to Tyreek Hill and maybe even a couple to Jalen Waddle too. And so until I see that, I'm a little bit nervous to buy into Tua as a top 5-ish type of fantasy quarterback. There's just so many other quarterbacks like Brock Purdy that have more upside.
Yeah, and they've been okay running the ball. A lot of the production for Devon Achane has been in the passing game, which is why he's been so successful and helped Tua last week with that strong outing because he is using him a little bit more than Jalen Waddle. But I agree with you. We'd like to see a little bit more from Waddle. Moving forward, Hunter Henry's done a great job with his quarterback. Drake May, in 4 starts, has leaned on his tight end, 12.6 PPR points or more in 3 of those games. Probably would have been 4 in a row, but Drake May did not finish the game against the Jets with a concussion. So it's a good setup for Hunter Henry, who we are looking for consistency from our tight ends. And this is one of the better matchups when you look at it because I think we'll see a situation where the Bears take away receivers. Not that the Patriots have a lot that you can lean on here, but one thing that we are seeing is it's basically 5 to 8 targets per game, but they're quality targets for Hunter Henry, and I think he'll continue to be in that 10-plus PPR point range. So with Drake May under center, Hunter Henry should be in your fantasy lineups. He's available still in about 30% of leagues, so go make sure he's not on the waiver wire, and you could start him over Dalton Kincaid. You could start him over Sam Laporta. You can start him over Kyle Pitts. You see number 6 tight end for us in our consensus ratings.
You see Gesicki right ahead of him. So if you're watching this and the Thursday night game hasn't taken off yet, start Gesicki over Henry.
T. Higgins not expected to play, so we like Mike Gesicki a lot. All right, Dave, let's take a look at your starts here, and you got an interesting quarterback on your list in Daniel Jones, who you like in that matchup against the Panthers in Germany. Najee Harris, Cortland Sutton, Khalil Shakir, and Taysom Hill. So Daniel Jones coming off a great game. Will it be 2 in a row for him against the Panthers?
He has 4 games this year with 20-plus, and last week's season high, 28.4. Now he gets Carolina. They've allowed 20 or more fantasy points to 4 of the past 6 quarterbacks that they've taken on. And Carolina, man, they play heavy zone coverage, and they are dead last in pass rush pressure rate. So this is going to be a matchup where Daniel Jones will be comfortable. And I thought in the second half last week he looked pretty good. Throwing to Malik Neighbors over and over again, that's going to make most quarterbacks look pretty good. I wouldn't trust him if I thought Carolina would get to him. And I know the offensive line issue, especially at left tackle, it's there, but I don't think the Panthers can take advantage of it. I think Daniel Jones is in for a good game. I would start him ahead of Tua.
You know what the common theme for those 4 games that Daniel Jones has done well? 3 of them have been outside of New Jersey. They're going to Germany. Last time I checked,
pretty far.
That's outside of New Jersey. So hopefully Daniel Jones keeps up. Last time was his first good game at home, really in 2 years, but certainly his best game at home this season. All right, let's talk about Taysom Hill, you have on your start list. And he's in that same range of tight ends for me as Mike Gesicki and Hunter Henry, as guys that you picked up off the waiver wire and can start this week. Pretty good matchup and very good opportunity for Taysom Hill.
Well, who's left for Derek Carr to throw to? And this is a guy, we call him a tight end. He's eligible at tight end, but he plays all over the place for New Orleans. He was 5th in route rate last week, but 1st in targets, 1st in catches, 1st in yak, Jamie. He's making plays after the catch, and you know that he can contribute in the run game, might score a rushing touchdown, maybe even he'll throw a pass. And this is a Falcons defense. They play zone coverage all the time. Lots of throws will be available underneath for Derek Carr and for Taysom Hill. So I think that there will be plenty of opportunities for Taysom Hill, top 12 type of fantasy tight end.
2 games this season where he's been north of 10 PPR points. One was last week. The other one was against the Falcons in the first meeting. He had 2 rushing touchdowns in that game. So it's not just Chris Olave missing. It's not just potentially Cedric Wilson missing. Jamal Williams, Kendre Miller, the 2 backfield guys behind Alvin Kamara. He may just be doing everything for the Saints, and like you said, maybe throws the ball a little bit as well. All right, let's talk about the guys that are on your sit list here, and you have some interesting names on this one. Kyler Murray, Rico Dowdle, Javonte Williams, DeAndre Hopkins, and DJ Moore. Dowdle, Hopkins and Hopkins coming off their best games of the season, and you don't like them for this week. We'll talk about Hopkins in a second, but what's the concern with DJ Moore? Is it just the disconnect with Caleb Williams? Is it the matchup, or are you just staying away in general from the Bears?
There's 2 problems. Patriots play a lot of man-to-man. Caleb Williams has struggled against man-to-man, and DJ Moore figures to be shadowed by Christian Gonzalez, and we know that Gonzalez, he might not be like upper echelon type of NFL cornerbacks yet. We might overrate him a little bit, but I still think he's really good, and I assume that he will be lined up against DJ Moore quite a bit. So between those 2 things, plus I think Chicago will be able to run the ball. I think they go back that way and try and make Caleb Williams a little bit more comfortable. And I really like what I saw from Rome Odunze last week. I wonder if he starts to get a little bit more involved. So just a little bit of a target crunch. Tough matchup. Quarterback isn't exactly steady. Makes me want to stay away from DJ Moore. You want to flex him? That's fine with me. But he's not a top 24 receiver.
DeAndre Hopkins last week had 9 targets, 8 catches, 86 yards, 2 touchdowns against Tampa Bay. Now he's taking on Denver, and you're sitting him.
Absolutely. And you want to talk about upper echelon cornerbacks in the National Football League, Patrick Surtain would be one of those guys. Earlier this year, we saw Patrick Surtain erase a lot of big-time outside wide receivers, and that's what DeAndre Hopkins has been. Although last week he played in the slot a little bit more for Kansas City. I don't think it necessarily makes a difference. I think Denver can look at DeAndre Hopkins, what his skill set is, what the targets are for him, and they'll say, let's sick Patrick Surtain on him and deal with the other players in this Kansas City offense. And you saw it last year. Rashee Rice wasn't even shadowed by Patrick Surtain. It was a full team effort, and Rashee Rice didn't have any good games against Denver. You know who had 2 good games against Denver last year? Travis Kelce. 9 targets in each of them, at least 11 PPR points in each of them. That's going to be the guy that I think Kansas City has a big game from, not DeAndre Hopkins.
I wonder if Denver learned their lesson not putting Surtain on Zay Flowers last week, even though it's not a great matchup for Surtain. But you saw the #1 receiver for Baltimore beat up on that Denver defense, and we'll see if they learned their lesson and put Surtain on Hopkins.
And you've got DeAndre Hopkins quarterback on your sit list.
Yeah, it's he's coming off his best game, 30 fantasy points last week. But you mentioned the games against Denver last year. In 2 games against the Broncos, he combined for 24.9 fantasy points. 1 quarterback has gone over 20 fantasy points against the Broncos this season. It was last week. It was Lamar Jackson. Lamar Jackson, a much better fantasy quarterback than Patrick Mahomes right now. So I think Mahomes goes back to being a little bit more of a game manager. I would try to sit him this week along with Jalen Waddle, Calvin Ridley, Sam Laporta, and Ferguson. Ridley's the one that might make people a little bit nervous to sit because he's been so good with Mason Rudolph. Will Levis may come back in the starts with Will Levis. Ridley's got 1 game over 8 PPR points. It's just not been a good connection so far between Levis and Ridley, but not an outright sit, more of a bustler. All right, make sure you check out our Fantasy Football Today podcast. You can find it wherever podcasts are available. Scan the QR code to make it easy on yourself. And make sure you check out our Fantasy Football Today podcast on YouTube, where you can watch us and see how pretty we look, but also get the best fantasy information that will help you win your fantasy leagues.